Okay, folks, so today we're going to look at the Industrious Revolution. You have to read the title a little carefully because it's very easy to mistake it for the Industrial Revolution. They are not the same thing. They're quite different. And this is about consumer behavior and the household economy from 1650 to the present. And the author of this work is Jan de Vries, who is a historian, an economic historian, and so on. So now to lay down first and foremost the context of the debate, we've gone through several books, several tracts, several arguments about the origin of the Industrial Revolution. We're still trying to understand how the British Industrial Revolution really happened. And I think first and foremost we looked at the development of new machines and the exploitation of the working class. This is the most conventional, traditional explanation, that you had the development of these new incredible machines that could do the work of many, many laborers, and that increased the productivity of labor many, many times. And that is the foundation of the Industrial Revolution, leading to, of course, the creation of various factories and mills and industries and so on and so forth. Then we've also looked at the Atlantic slave trade, the production of cotton and sugar and tobacco with Sven Beckert, the incredible book called The Empire of Cotton, and other things as well. We have additionally looked at the colonial trade, which involves both India as well as China, the tea trade with China, the opium trade with China, the production of tea and opium in India, etc., and the profits, the vast profits from colonialism. And in the previous class, we examined the development of the market system as a whole, the developments of the markets rather, and then the eventual development of the market system, which was a process that occurred before the Industrial Revolution. Today, we're also looking at a period of history just before the Industrial Revolution, and we're also looking at how just before the Industrial Revolution, there seems to be the growth of labor productivity and an increasing orientation towards the market. But what we're doing, which is different from the last reading, is that we are placing in the center of our explanation the household as a unit of economic analysis. And secondly, together with the household, we're going to be looking at European marriage patterns, specifically Western European marriage patterns, and how these were different from marriage patterns elsewhere in the world, and how they may have contributed to what we are referring to as the Industrious Revolution, which is from 1650 onwards, also referred to as the long 18th century, because the 18th century in this context is starting from the 17th century, the 1650s. Okay? So what is it about this argument which is different from the last one? So what we're looking at is that during the long 18th century, that is 1650 all the way up to the end of the 18th century, we are looking at the rise of a new kind of society, a society based around consumption, the consumer society. And one example that one can give of this are pocket watches. Just let's get a round of hands to see how many of you are wearing a watch, a wristwatch. 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's very few. In my own generation, when we were going to college, everybody wanted to have a nice watch. Today, people, this is before the cell phone was invented, believe it or not. It was in my lifetime that the cell phone was invented. The first cell phone that we saw was a Parktel, which was a suitcase this big that you had to carry around with you like this. So, but before that, the item that everybody liked to show off was a watch. And so people would buy very nice watches, men as well as women, etc. And this is a pretty old trend. For example, Parisian inventories reveal that as early as 1700, 13% of those who were servants and 5% of wage earners also owned a watch. So it's not just in the elite that they were owning pocket watches. A pocket watch, wo wali na jo chain pe lagi hoti hai and you take it out. It's so stylish, etc. You see that in period pieces. आप कहीं जा रही हैं? अच्छा, okay. Pura suitcase. You're directly coming, it seems, from. Okay, that's called dedication, people. Okay, so pocket watches had come also to symbolize working men's status. So if you had a pocket watch, that was considered to be a kind of status symbol. The reason why the author talks about pocket watches is because it helps us understand consumer behavior and its history. Pocket watches are an instance of the public getting involved with consumption, which was beyond their direct needs or subsistence, to have things that they liked, not because they served necessarily any very directly important purpose, although a pocket watch can be very useful to keep the time and come to class on time, etc. Probably the reason why you guys are not on time is because you don't have watches. But anyway, the point is that this is an example of a new kind of consumption. It's not just necessities of life, it's beyond that. So these consumers are now regarded in modern literature as pioneers in the construction of modernity. Because one of the features of modernity that we see is that our new societies are built around consumption. Whether you're drinking XYZ kind of coffee, or you're having ABC kind of soft drink, or you're visiting this, or you're wearing certain kind of clothes and jeans, etc., they more or less have come to define our personalities. So we can say that modernity is really shaped around consumption. Post-modernity even more is shaped around consumption even more. In fact, you could even make the argument that modernity was based around production, and post-modernity seems to be based entirely around consumption. But the point nonetheless remains that it distinguishes itself from older ways of living by the fact of this vast increase in the commodities at the disposal of society, although not all of society can really partake in that consumption. So for that reason, when historians look at these early examples of consumption started taking off, they look at it as something heroic almost, that changes how people think about consumption and leads to what we refer to as the modern period. So when we look at traditional consumer theory, we look at traditional analysis. The consumer responds to the developing productive forces, not the other way around. In most economic historians, when they write about the rise of consumption and production, they will look at the supply side of the equation. They will look at, well, these new machines are invented that can process cotton very quickly. These new machines are invented that can process sugar and tobacco and other things much more quickly, and the ability to create China and so on. So we look at those sorts of things. How was porcelain invented and so on. The assumption, of course, is that once things have been invented, then you take them to the market, then consumers will be like, wow, this is amazing, and they'll just buy it. Correct? That's the kind of latent assumption in this examination which tends to emphasize more about supply side economics and the development of productive forces than it looks at the demand side, which is why would people want to buy these things in the first place? So standard consumer theory, by which of course we are referring now to microeconomics and macroeconomics or introduction to economics, जो आप आम पढ़ते हैं, standard consumer theory posits a sovereign individual consumer. When you look at indifference curve, you're not looking at the indifference curve of a family or a society or any kind of collective. You're looking at the indifference curve of an individual. The methodological unit of analysis is always the individual. And it's an individual which doesn't necessarily have a gender. It's an individual who doesn't have a family, doesn't have an ethnicity, doesn't have a race. It's an abstract, completely abstract individual. So the individual consumer is standing face to face with the market and behaving in a manner calculated to maximize his or her individual utility independently of the decisions of others. So it's always, when you look at this analysis, it's always the individual standing in relation to a product and determining whether I like it or I don't like it, or do I want to buy it, do I not want to buy it, how does it relate to other products, etc. It's purely an individual calculation. What's wrong with that, you probably say? Well, one of the things is that this analysis may be inadequate because it fails to examine the individual's family ties and obligations and their impact on consumer behavior. So one thing we notice, of course, is that family ties, especially in Desi culture, tend to be extremely important. You may like something, in fact, you may like someone, but if your family doesn't like that something or that someone, you may end up having to choose what your family likes. I mean, that's why all the movies are about families forcing you to fall in love with somebody that you don't want to fall in love with, and then Shah Rukh Khan saying, okay, nahi, somehow or the other winning the family over in Dil Wale Dulhania and convincing them that, what was the name of whatever the actress was? Kajol should really marry Shah Rukh because he's such a funny guy. And because when his parents and brothers beat the crap out of him, he still doesn't give up because he loves us so much. So anyway, that's the point. So I'm trying to say that families do matter. In our own society, families matter. For example, when students come to LUMS and they try and select what courses they want to study, 9 times out of 10 I get this response from people, sir, वो अभी अबू ने कहा था economics पढ़ लो, तो मैंने economics take कर दिया, वैसे मेरा दिल जो चाहता है मैं anthropology पढूं. I mean, I've had that so many times that it's unbelievable. If you are a rational, utility maximizing individual, right? If you're the individual is taking the decision on the basis of what appeals to you the most, then you would expect that the vast majority of students would be perfectly capable of saying, well, I don't want to study this, I really want to study it. But the fact of the matter is that they go through an awful lot of cognitive dissonance and problems, and they have to see counselors, and they have to talk it over with people. Okay, sir, what do I do? My family really wants this, but I really want this. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Right? But a crisis hota hai. Maybe I also gone through it, not because my family was forcing me, they never did. But, well, my mother did. But actually, she did a lot. But the point is that, well, I didn't care about that much, right? But the point is still it made an impact on me कि भाई सोसाइटी भी है, मुझे सोचना होगा मुझे क्या करना है. मुझे बचपन में मिसाल तौर पे जब मैं कॉलेज गया था तो मुझे बड़ा शौक था कि I should be going to theatre. So, because I used to write plays and I used to act in my own plays and I love doing plays, etc. बचपन से I like doing plays. So, फिर मुझे मगर डर ये लगता था साथ कि अगर मैं ड्रामा करना शुरू कर दिया तो यार उससे पैसे कैसे कमाऊंगा, फिर क्या करूंगा, ये है वो. बड़ा मैं तज़ब्ज़ुब का शिकार था. खैर ड्रामा तो नसीब नहीं हुआ. मैंने सोचा टीचर बन जाऊंगा, ड्रामा तो खुद ही हो जाएगा, आपको देखने की मजबूरी भी हो जाएगी. I'll have a captive audience. So now you understand my pedagogy and the way I teach. But be that as it may. Funny example. But the point nonetheless remains that we care what other people think. We don't just care about what we think and what we want, but we know what we want sometimes, and yet we know that other people want something else, and yet we conform to other people's wishes. That's not a rational individual utility maximizer. Something else is going on. So let's look at some of the new literature that has arisen on the Industrial Revolution. Firstly, there's the thesis about the revolt of the early modernists. New research has challenged the conventional belief in growthless traditional economy. So the new research has sort of shown that what we consider the pre-industrial revolution economy in Britain was actually growing already before the Industrial Revolution. I think we've shown this already with respect to the second agricultural revolution. There was substantial growth before the Industrial Revolution happened. Of course, the Industrial Revolution is also pretty large, but then there's the revisionist macroeconomics of the British Industrial Revolution, and that shows that, in fact, the initial estimates about how quickly the Industrial Revolution was impacting growth were overestimates. And in fact, they've been revised to about half now of the original estimates. So the difference between the traditional economy and the industrial economy has been somewhat exaggerated, this new literature seems to prove. The other literature that's very interesting is the Western European marriage pattern. What is that? The Cambridge Group of History of Population and Social Structure made the argument that the nuclear family structures of modern Western European countries and their offshoots are not a product of industrialization, but have a much earlier origin. This is quite shocking, because a lot of people in anthropology, sociology, even political science, where we touch on the question of family, we automatically say, oh, nuclear family is the product of modern period capitalism, it's associated with capitalism. But this group of researchers, the Cambridge Group for the History of Population and Social Structure, has shown that in Western Europe specifically, this kind of family structure existed before. We'll examine what the family structure is in just a little bit. Gary Becker and others, lastly, have illuminated the family or household as an economic unit that relates production and consumption decisions. So this is called the new household economics. So the decisions about what you're going to do, where you're going to do it, are not taken by the individual. They are taken by the household. That doesn't mean that the household votes on them equally. That's not what's being implied. But the unit of analysis of those decisions is the household. Just like I've proven right now, that in terms of the major that you select, the decision is not your individual decision. In terms of the BV or Mia you select, many a times, the decision is not your individual decision, only your individual decision. So career as well as marriage, दो सबसे important चीज़ें होती हैं. दोनों में आपका individual decision अगर नहीं है, तो फिर that kind of model goes out the window. So what's and who is deciding? The household. You have certain inputs in the household, no doubt. You say, Ammi, Abbu, nahi, ye nahi karna, wo karna hai. Abbu probably has the biggest say in that. Ammi is number 2. You are somewhere like number 10. बीच में कोई 9-10 लोग होंगे जो हैं ही नहीं. Right? So, but the point is that it's the household that has to take the decision. And especially, in the working class, I've seen this very often, कि they actually take decisions like, अच्छा बड़ा भाई जो है वो फैक्ट्री जाएगा, फिर उससे जो पैसे कमाएंगे उससे छोटा भाई मज़ीद पढ़ेगा. छोटा भाई अक्सर ज़्यादा पढ़ा होता है बड़े भाई से, because बड़ा भाई actually helps to finance the छोटा भाई's study, right? So now that is a decision, that's not an individual decision. So there's like a plan that the family follows about the allocation of its own children and resources and what work they do and how they're going to use that for consumption and how they're going to cross-subsidize and that sort of thing. That's very interesting. So what is the Industrious Revolution? Northwestern Europe and British North America experienced an industrious revolution during a long 18th century, which he considers to be 1650 to 1850. That's like 200 years. That's why he's calling it the long century. He really should learn a little bit of math. Why not just call it 2 centuries? But anyway, छोड़ो इस बात को. In which a growing number of households acted to reallocate their productive resources. Households की क्या productive resources हैं? Which are chiefly the time of their members. Who's going to do what? Okay, they're going to reallocate them in ways that increase both the supply of market-oriented money-earning activities and the demand for goods offered in the marketplace. So they are reallocating between 1650 and 1850. Western European households seem to be changing their pattern of the allocation of their time. What work are they going to do? And how are they going to enjoy the benefits of that work? They're orienting them towards activities that give them money, okay, produce money. I'm sure they were working before as well, but there's a lot of work that you can do which does not necessarily earn money. Yeah, it can be subsistence, it can be care work, it can be leisure, it can be other things, etc. There's a lot of activities you can be involved with, which does not necessarily earn anything. But now this is a reorientation towards the market. Why? Why the market? Because from the market you can earn moolah, money. And with moolah, what can you do with moolah? You buy things like watches, pocket watches, other things, etc. So you need to earn the actual money to be able to buy things. Otherwise, you can do whatever you want to do in terms of your time, but that doesn't earn anything. But while we are placing greater emphasis on the demand side, the argument, of course, is that the household is both. It's supply and demand. Its supply is connected to its demand. If it supplies labor, it is able to demand things from the market. So, and that decision of allocation is not being made necessarily just by the capitalist or by the feudal lord. It's being made within the household. And that's what he wants us to think about. Okay. Now, we have often come to think of family values as a cultural lag, right? We often think if somebody talks about, George Bush comes and talks about family values, we think, oh my God, how old-fashioned is that, right? Traditional analysis has thought of families as the repository of obsolete values. ये तो अब सारी पुरानी हो गई बातें, right? But you're right in pointing out that the unconventional value is women should go to work. The conventional, traditional value is women should stay at home, take care of the kids, etc. And that's associated with family values. But here he says, whereas traditionally analysis itself has thought of traditional families as being older and archaic even and having a cultural lag, Schumpeter introduced the concept of family decomposition. He says, as things are progressing, families are decomposing. Ultimately, the family is left with only 2 functions: the socialization of children, perhaps, and the establishment of a private sphere of affective, yani ke love relationships. So in this framework, he says, controversially in my opinion, feminism is almost like the last stage of capitalism because it completely explodes the family. It completely decomposes the family. although we may disagree with that. But the point is that he puts feminism in a very, not necessarily in a bad light, but in a very different light, because oftentimes we think of feminism as being very much opposed to capitalism, but here he's kind of suggesting feminism is the highest stage of capitalism because it accomplishes what the capitalist system anyway is accomplishing, which is taking more and more stuff away from the family and reducing the role of the family, decomposing the family, and reducing its role to its bare minimum, the effective relationship between parents and the raising of children. Aside from that, family plays no real function, right? That's how we traditionally analyze things. So families were taking lots of decisions earlier, with respect to, they were taking pretty much all the decisions. I mean, if you look at the biradri and the family within the biradri itself is an extended family. So kith and kin would take pretty much all the decisions pertaining to one's life in the past, right? In the traditional feudal system, that was very much based around the family and the, even the serfs, etc. We call that family labor. They were working together as work units, etc., etc. Today, that's no longer the case. Families are not working together. They are not necessarily even living together. Sometimes you have one person in New York and the other person in Lahore, etc. From rural areas, people to come work in urban areas, and they go back to their rural areas where their families live. So, and they're away for months at an end, and they go back every week, every month they go for a few days to ghar ja rahe hain ji, buddhi nu milan ja rahe hain, right? The question here is, why do that instead of spend more time with your kids? I'm sure many of you have seen these tweets and these small videos. Like the other day I was watching this video and there was this fisherman and it's an interesting parable. I'll tell you the story, okay? So a fisherman and a billionaire are having a conversation, right? And they're sitting on an island, a beautiful, sort of desert island or whatever. And the billionaire asks the fisherman, okay, so what do you do? He says, well, I go fishing in the morning, I spend time with my kids in the afternoon, in the evening I go to the local pub, etc. I play guitar and I hang out with my friends, and that's pretty much my whole day. And I do a little bit of fishing in the morning. That's my whole day. He says, oh, this is not good. You should get a job, make some money. He's like, okay, if I get a job and make money, what will happen? Well, then you should have developed a plan in 10 years. You should invest in bonds and stocks and, derivatives, etc. And in 10 years, you could make this much money. He says, okay, that sounds pretty good. Then what? He says, well, then you take your company, which has now $1 million or $1 billion company or whatever, and you sell it, and just come out of it and just take all that money. He says, okay, that sounds good. Then what? Well, then you take all that money and you come to a nice desert island and you fish in the morning and you spend time with your kids in the afternoon and you go play music in the pub in the evening. So what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that wherever you're spending time doing all that work, you're also giving up time, doing a lot of other activities that potentially could make you just as happy. We don't know, right? We don't really know. So why is it that human beings now begin to prefer doing this, slaving and killing themselves? All of you people are just all the time, you're like, oh, sir, wo flana aa raha hai, recruiter, or, हमने जाना है, क्लास छोड़ रहे हैं, पागल हो रहे हैं, बाल खींच रहे हैं, टाइयां पहन रहे हैं, पहुंचे हुए हैं, अभी थर्ड ईयर भी नहीं कंप्लीट हुआ. And he was just like obsessed about, what job am I going to get? Oh my God. It's like how did that happen? Instead of being involved with the kind of things that we were involved with when we were your age, which was like, how fast can I drive this car and can I do the airplane with it? I know, it was really absurd. I mean, किसके साथ फटा कर सकते हैं हम? कौन जरा गैंगी किस्म का बंदा है, उसका फटा करेंगे तो फिर लोग कहेंगे ये तो उससे भी ज़्यादा गैंगी है. I mean, it could be a number of things, I'm just making fun of myself. But the point is, how did this orientation develop? It's a funny orientation. Well, I mean, and it's so natural to you guys, because I guess to some extent you're brought up in that frame of mind, that to you it doesn't appear extraordinary at all. But when I hear it, it appears very extraordinary to me, precisely because it kind of like, yeah, you're too young to be thinking about this stuff, just, whatever. In fact, he's trying to say that it's the reorientation that makes money more important. So he's doing the chicken and egg thing. Is it that the money became more important and the household turned that way? Or is it because the household turned that way that all of these changes began to happen? we have always accepted this argument that there's a reorientation towards the market. That's a given. Everybody knows this, right? There's nothing new there in that thesis. What's new in his thesis is, why did it happen? Now we assume, think about your assumption here. Your assumption here is almost, well, it was natural or something. But he's trying to show it's not natural. It's not quote unquote natural, right? It's a learned process. And there's people who are taking a decision to reorient themselves. Why do they do that? I'll give you one more example, which is in a previous reading we read about how peasants, black slaves and peasants, colonial peasants, etc., preferred actually to leave the cash cropping and market economy and go back to subsistence, because they said that's a better economy. We're happy. We don't want to be wealthy. Now, to someone like ourselves, that may sound like an absurd idea. What? Not want to be wealthy? How is that possible? You have to be insane or something. But that has already assumed that it was human nature to be like that. That's an assumption that's not proven yet. So what he's trying to say is that orientation towards the market itself is a decision that was taken, and it's not so simple that decision just was going to emerge anyway. There's a process why it happened. Millions of people took that decision. Well, how did that decision come about? And he's saying, to understand that decision, you have to examine the household and its reorientation towards the market. Okay? I'm not saying I agree with this point of view that feminism is the highest stage of capitalism. So I can't defend an argument that I don't entirely agree with, but I'll present his point of view, which is, if the decomposition of the family is it's not just about women joining or not joining the workforce, but the decomposition of the family is the inevitable product of the development of market capitalism, then feminism, if we accept the assumption that feminism also accepts the decomposition or wants to speed up or develop or catalyze the decomposition of the family, because it considers traditional family values to be patriarchal, he says would be the final stage of capitalism. That's the link that he's trying to draw. We can trash that argument. I don't care, because I'm not necessarily even defending it, okay? The traditional analysis has thought of families as being something that is traditional and a cultural lack, but he wants to challenge that assumption. He's saying that's not necessarily the case. In fact, he says nuclear families, which were earlier thought to have been the product of capitalism, he says, have existed for centuries before industrialization in most of Western Europe. Not in Eastern Europe, not in Southern Europe, but in Western Europe. Okay, interesting. Nuclear families have existed for a long time before the Industrial Revolution, he says. So let's find out, what is a nuclear family? It was formed by the marriage of a husband and wife who thereby established a separate residence and hence an independent household. So they're not living with the parents. You get married and you move out of your parents' home. Most children, in fact, left their parental homes in their teens. Oh my God, ages 15 to 18. And I discovered this for myself when I went to the United States and I started studying there, and jo mere saath students the, they said, oh yeah, I moved out of my parents' home. He's 18-year-old telling me. I was like, really? Moved out of your parents? To me, that was like, wow, that's bold to move out of your parents' home. How did you do that? And he's like, yeah, but everybody was doing it. And it surprised me at first when I saw it. And I was quite surprised by it. I mean, you wouldn't think of moving out of your parents' home at 21, 22 or whatever age you are, right? You would only think of moving out of your parents' home when you get married. And even then, you would move into somebody else's parents' home first and foremost. Am I wrong about that? हाँ, अपने मियाँ के घर में रहोगे, मियाँ के पास इतने पैसे ही नहीं होते कि वो जो है वो अपना घर ले ले, right? So that's how most marriages occur, right? I mean, when I got married to Mavish, yeah, we moved into the annex. Well, I was already in the annex behind my parents' home, which was like one room basically. We moved into that room, but that is my parents' home. It's not my house, right? And then later I said, okay, we want to move to Lums. So when we moved to Lums, that's when we became a nuclear family. But before that, we were not a nuclear family. We were kind of like an extended family, right? All the brothers and sisters living together. How many of you from families that are extended families? Nuclear families? Wow, this is shocking to me. Interesting. A generation ago, in my generation, you would have got the exact opposite answer. Okay. So, but even if that is the case, I'm sure in the families Is there anyone that's created an independent household between the age of 15 to 18, started living away from their parents at 15 to 18? I'm not talking about dorms here, okay? Anyone raise your hand? I rented an apartment. I was 18 years old. I was like, okay, I'm going to move out. You know anybody like that? You know one person. Yeah. That shows you. But that's not what we do, right? But in the West, that's actually quite common. So late marriage, एक तरफ से शादी बड़ी late हो रही है. And servanthood gave young people, especially women, the opportunity to save and bring resources to a new household. So here is a person between the ages of 15 and 18. They've moved out of their family home. They're living somewhere on rent or whatever, and they're working. And they're getting married not early but quite late. So there is a period of time when they are working and they don't have kids and they don't have a wife or they don't have a husband. They don't have those kinds of responsibilities. So in that period, the earnings that they make, they are able to save a bigger percentage of those earnings. So this was a period of maximum productive capacity without responsibility for children, a period during which saving would be easy. What are you doing with the same period in which they were working and saving? You're here at Lums, spending and enjoying yourselves. So what happens? Young people getting married late but working very early in life and becoming independent from their parents very early in life are able to save more. And as they're able to save more in terms of money, they get oriented towards the market. Thank you. So traditional families, for example, have complex households. They are strong in the sense that they have a greater self-insurance capacity than nuclear households. So what does insurance mean? That if one person falls sick, if one person can't work, the rest of the family will take care of him. So it's an insurance policy. It's safer, right? But this capacity to absorb risk comes at a price. There are more rigid rules and conventions governing the allocation of economic resources. So if you're living with your parents, right, and they're ensuring that you're safe, etc., you're insured from anything bad happening to you. वो कहते हैं ना बाप का साया या पेरेंट्स का साया की बात करते हैं ना कि it is a क्या कहना चाहिए, it is a big basis of support in our society. ठीक है ना, आधी ज़्यादा नौकरी माँ प्यो कहते हैं यार मेरा पुत्र हारे अगर हम देख लाई तो क्या कहना चाहिए. So yeah, that happens, but then it also makes the household a lot more rigid in terms of economic decisions, because if somebody is paying for your education and paying for your food and paying for your clothing and paying for your bijli, pani, gas, etc., even paying for your entertainment, then of course they'll be able to say to you कि पुत्र 8 बजे तक घर आना है, ठीक है, या 10 बजे तक चलो, 8 बजे maybe an exaggeration, right? They're able to say to you कि look, we've taken care of you, ये है वो है, now you should study economics and not do something silly like philosophy या जो भी, right? या ये अच्छी सी लड़की है, ऐसे ब्याह कर लो, घर वगैरह जो भी. They're able to take those decisions. So in these bigger families, decisions are not purely individual. So children remain dependents even into late adulthood. Children भी नहीं कहना चाहिए. People in traditional families remain dependents even into late adulthood. 35 साल उम्र होगी, 40 साल उम्र होगी, माँ प्यो से के साथ ही गुजर बसर हो रहा है और माँ प्यो ही सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं. ऐसे देखा होगा ना आपने किसी ना किसी को. झूठ ना बोलो, दसो मैनू. Yes? You know somebody in the family? See? Well, not too many, but certainly you know people like that, right? Yes? Another thing is, look, yaar, if we go for this nuclear family structure, then I think about 80% of our TV serials will be destroyed. So to save TV serials, I think we really need.
But
because
they really need to be saved.
Yeah, otherwise entertainment कहाँ से आएगी? सास, बहू, बहन, साली, ये वो सारे. It's all about family structure, right? And it's sometimes it's decomposition, sometimes it's recomposition, etc. But that is, why are we so concerned about that? I mean, we make fun of that. We make fun of that, कि हाँ यार सास बहू के ड्रामे, we make fun of that. But the reason why we have so many of those dramas is because, of course, that's a very integral part of our lives. If you listen to this guy, Vries, he's explaining to you that the decisions are being taken by the household about where you allocate your time, what decisions you take, who you get married to, what career you'll have. Those are not purely individual decisions. So if they're not purely individual decisions, they're decisions taken by others, there's bound to be conflict. And since millions of people are experiencing that conflict, given those family structures, then millions of people want to watch things about that conflict and what to do about their own predicament. So that's why we shouldn't only make fun of those dramas. There's a real foundation. I can assure you that those dramas, if you show it to a Western audience, they'll be like, what the hell are you talking about? Just move out of the house, get a job. They'll probably say something like that, right? They just won't be able to understand कि नहीं ऐसे नहीं हो सकता, वो मेरा प्यो है, ये वो मेरी माँ है. अब मेरी माँ, for example, if she calls me right now and says, Taimur, come over right now, I'll be like, okay, mom, मैं आ रहा हूँ. I'll drop everything. So I claim. She doesn't accept the claim, but it's true, right? Yes. Or you've seen so many Western movies where parents are desperate to meet their kids on Thanksgiving, and kids are like, oh, Dad, I met you for last Thanksgiving. I don't want to meet you for another Thanksgiving. It's shocking to me. How can you say no to your dad? Oh, Mom, gee, how weird is that? No drama. How can desis? We can't live. We can't live without drama. It's like a business meeting, yaar. I mean, come on, that's not a family, right? So the bonds of family are weaker. I was watching this, this really good actor who does a lot of roles. He was in Spider-Man. He was the editor, who hates Peter Parker in Spider-Man. I don't know I forget his name. Simmons, yes, I think so, yeah. Anyway, so he was making an Oscar speech or some speech, award acceptance speech, and he was like, call your mom, call your dad, your parents are important, call them. And I was like, dude, you don't need to make that speech to me because my mom calls me every day. and my dad, and if I don't pick up the call, they really get angry with me. They're like, phone kyun nahi uthaya? So anyway. So we want to develop a new understanding of consumption. Utility can be divided into the search for comfort and the search for pleasure. So this goes back to the point you were making earlier about novelty and why people would buy things, etc. So let's take utility and divide it into two things. Comfort means कि यार मेरे पास गाड़ी हो, I can come and go easily, पंखा लगा हो, AC लगा हो, I can live a comfortable life. खाना अच्छा हो, पहनने के लिए कपड़े अच्छे हों, वगैरह वगैरह. And then search for pleasure, which is different. कि कपड़ा सिर्फ नहीं चाहिए, मगर कपड़ा भी को बहुत ही refined किस्म का कपड़ा हो. गाड़ी is not just for getting from one place to another, but it should look cool, etc. Right? So these are two different kinds of consumption. The illusions people are capable of nurturing. Here's an interesting thing about consumption. That when you want to buy something, you have this illusion. Okay, oh my God, when I get this thing and I play that guitar, jiska fretboard is like cream, uske baad I will just destroy Eric Clapton and I'll be just amazing. And so in your imagination, you always think that when you buy that thing, it will be just the next level amazing thing and you'll never want anything after that. But when you actually buy that thing, you're like, yeah, it's not bad. I'm still not Eric Clapton. Oh, there's another guitar there. Maybe that will make me Clapton, right? So the way you kind of create an illusion about that thing, the anticipation of something, of a new toy or of a new gadget, is sometimes far greater than the actual gadget. Am I right or am I wrong? Say keh raha hu? Huh? I'm right, right? I'm always right, except when I'm left. Like for example, the new iPhone. Everybody's like, oh my God, I want the new iPhone. Is that the new iPhone? No. Okay. I want the new iPhone. Is it 13 plus now? That's the 14. I'm obviously behind the times. And then you're like, oh my God, it's got this camera and this megapixel and it's got flana and flana, it can do this. And you go to the store and you're like, oh, look at it. Oh my God, it's so amazing. It's so light, it's so beautiful. And then you finally buy it and you use it for a couple of hours, maybe a day or two, and you're like, yeah, put it in your pocket and that's it. It's kind of like fades too quickly, especially if you paid like 4-5 lakh rupees for it. No? In comparison to the price you pay for it. The anticipation of buying something is much more greater than the thing itself. Yes. So the illusions are that people are capable of nurturing. That doesn't mean they always nurture those illusions, but you are certainly capable of exaggerating in your own mind how great the new iPhone is going to be, are always better than the reality they can experience, causing the consumer always to be vaguely dissatisfied with reality, not entirely dissatisfied, but vaguely dissatisfied, somewhat. Longing for something more, something better. This feeds the cycle of consumption. We now have a consumer actively engaged in a process of discovery. So like, okay, this is a good phone, but can I get a better one? This is a good guitar, but can I get a better one? This is a good watch, but can I get a better one, etc., etc. The search for social comfort, with its concern for status, distinction, and identity, is limitless. So the search for your own comfort may be limited. You get comfortable if you have a nice house, blah, 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 the rest of it. But social comfort, that's limitless and tends to be intensified by the very process of economic growth. Finally, we have the search for pleasure, driven by modern hedonism. The relief of discomfort produces genuine utility, but through the removal of stimulation, it also creates and intensifies the modern condition of boredom. Boredom has no simple antidote. More consumption of existing good does not relieve boredom. You keep going back in the cycle because you keep buying something in anticipation, oh, this is going to be great, and then after a few days it wears out, and then you have to buy something new, and then you have to buy something new. So it is a loop that you create which gets you involved with consumption. It's a certain mentality, let's say, that you create that gets you involved with that G. So that wanting more is something that is also a learnt behavior. It doesn't always automatically exist for people to always want more. ये तो एक premise था ना economics का कि we're always utility maximizes and so on. But this is not even about utility, because you can get a lot of utility, if utility is what we're talking about, you can from things that don't cost anything. Like the most wonderful things in life, as they say, are free. It's not untrue. Good friends, good company, good relationships, etc. Those are the most important things. Stuff doesn't make you happy. People make you happy. Because people are subjective beings. Stuff is not subjective. It's objective. It's an object. How much can an object make you happy? If I had the same object and I didn't have people to share it with, trust me, the object also wouldn't make me happy. If I bought the latest iPhone, or I get a new wedding ring or something, I want to show it to people. Hi, how are you? Why do I want to show it to people? Because it's actually, it's not the ring that makes you happy. It's not necessarily the ring that makes you happy. That may also make you happy. But it's the conversations around it, what it signifies, what it means, or the relations it creates, etc. Sharing it with other people. When you do something nice, first thing you want to do is you want to share it with your friends. Or something bad happens, you want to share it with your friends. So those are actually really, really high utility things, right? But they're free. Shocking. I'm saying there used to be people who were not bothered with the market. They were like, actually, I don't want to earn more. I'm happy jitne mujhe paise mil rahe. Does that sound weird? How many of you think that's super weird? Raise your hands if that's like a super weird thing to say. What? I don't want to earn more. I'm happy with this pay. Super weird, right? I mean, rest of you are probably not raising your hand because you're like, I don't want to offend sir. Say he's super weird or something. But yeah, it is super weird in today's society. But that's only because we have been acclimatized to this idea of, well, you need to work hard to make lots of money. Why do you need to work hard to make lots of money? You don't know, but that's just what everybody's doing, so you're also doing it. And then you discover that people who make lots of money are not necessarily happier than people who don't make lots of money. Of course, if you don't make any money and you're below the poverty line, then you're going to be deeply unhappy. But beyond a certain level, did you know that happiness is not correlated with money? Okay, this is a shocker. I'm sorry to have to break this to you. This is the reality. Okay, here's another shocking thing. It's not if you're really at the bottom, you rise to a certain level, if you're below your basic needs, you're going to be very unhappy. But after you rise to a certain level, उसके बाद इनकम जब आपकी एक्सपेंड होती रहती है, उस एक्सपेंशन के साथ आपकी यूटिलिटी या हैप्पीनेस नहीं एक्सपेंड होती. You plateau out at some point. And no matter how rich you get, you're still plateaued out. Hamna doesn't believe me that she's saying, sir, ये तो हो ही नहीं सकता. When after 40 years, call me up and then we'll talk. There's lots of research on it.
There's a certain number, I don't remember exactly what, but there was a certain number of income. After that, an increase in income would not.
You're absolutely right. Yes, she's absolutely right. Yes.
And even there's this supply curve called the backward bending supply curve
Right.
of labor,
Yes.
where you're willing to supply less hours of labor after you reach a certain level of labor.
Exactly right. And that sounds weird, but at some period in history, the backward bending supply curve would have been inevitable, because people would have said, my needs are fulfilled, I don't need to work more. Do you know, okay, let me ask you a different question. Do you know anybody like that in your family or friends who says, my needs are fulfilled, I don't need to work anymore? So you do know people like that, right? That's not extraordinary. All right. So many questions. Gee. So household, there's a trade-off. And the trade-off is the more time devoted to the market work, the more goods the household can buy. Okay? If I work in the market, I get more money. If I get more money, I can buy more things. But the less time is left for the transformation of these goods into the ultimately consumed commodities, which would be Z, and for the consumption time to enjoy them. So if I work 12 hours a day, I can make more money, but now I can't enjoy the stuff that I want to enjoy after I've made that money. So that becomes like a pretty strange sort of bargain. Because if I make like $100,000 a year, I'm an American doctor or someone, but I'm working like 12 or 14 hours a day. At some point, I'm going to be like, yeah, I make all this money. I have a beautiful apartment. I can go to Timbuktu anytime that I want to, but I can't enjoy the money that I have. So there's that trade-off as well. Just because you make money doesn't mean you can enjoy it, because you might be working too much. Like that happens a lot with investment bankers. They work so hard and so many long hours, it drains them out. They have a lot of money, but they don't have any time to enjoy that money at all. It keeps building up in the bank, and then they spend it foolishly in ways that they shouldn't even spend it, and in very short bursts here and there, buying extremely expensive things, which doesn't really necessarily make them very happy. And then they burn out in an early age, and then they retire, and they're like, okay, now I want to enjoy my wealth. That can happen. Yes.
But then where does this idea fit into a household thing? Because right now when we're thinking about the investment bank or whatever, we're looking at the individual. A lot of people make a lot of money. Our future generations can enjoy this money. Or
yes.
If we have a lot of money, then we can get married to the right person. That's also the household.
Right. So that's exactly right here. The degree of calculation and decision making chosen by consumers will be related to the knowledge and experience, that is the social capital or consumption capital they bring to the enterprise. So some families may say, I want to save this money because for insurance for my kids, or to send them to college, or whatever. Others families may take different decisions. That depends on their social capital, right? Consumption. Then we also have to think about consumption bundles and consumption clusters and complementary goods. What are these? So there's a thing called the Diderot effect. What was that? It was when Denis Diderot, the great French encyclopedist, he, I believe, bought a new cloak or curtains or something for his study. And when he bought the new curtains, he's like, they look absolutely amazing, but the sofa next to it now looks really shabby. So I had to change the sofa. When he changed the sofa, it's like the desk next to that doesn't look very good. So I had to change that. When he changed that, then he had to change the carpet, then he had to change the lights and the ceilings. Pretty soon the whole study had to be changed, right? Because that one curtain just wasn't going with the rest of his study. So we have what are called consumption bundles. That's very interesting because they're complementary goods, right? Consumption, in other words, often jumps. It's not linear. It does not change marginally and continuously, but often takes a discontinuous form. If you are a certain class, you have a certain consumption bundle. These are the foods you eat, these are the kind of clothes you wear, this is the kind of transportation you use. It's a whole bundle that comes with that lifestyle. As soon as you jump from working class to, let's say, middle class, suddenly the whole lifestyle changes. No, you can't have this car anymore or this motorcycle anymore because now you're middle class, so you have to have a Honda 125. Can't have a CD70 anymore. I'm middle class. Okay, then together with that, I have to have a nicer helmet, and I have to have a nicer house, and I have to send my daughters to a better school, etc. It's a whole bundle. It's a whole lifestyle choice. Or usse upar jab aap chale jate hain, get into the bourgeoisie, then you can't suddenly start wearing dhotis and come to slums and like, hello folks, I just got this really nice dhoti. It's ₹1,00,000, but it's still a dhoti. Nobody's going to accept that, right? So maybe that's not such a good example, but you get the picture. That these commodities often come in these bundles. And if you buy one, then you have to buy another. So to summarize chapter 1, individuals consume primarily in the context of households. That's what we've learned, first thing. And households, much like firms that combine inputs to produce goods according to production function, combine purchase goods and household labor to produce the ultimately consumed Z commodities according to available consumption technologies. So households will allocate the time that they will work, the time that they will use for leisure and luxury, and the time that they will use for all of the way in which they will allocate production and consumption of resources. Households are the key. So what is the industrious revolution? Well, leisure is one of the categories that we're going to touch upon now, and we want to try and understand it. He says it's a tricky concept. It has three different dimensions. First is, in terms of leisure, is consumption time. To have leisure, you have to have a certain amount of time that you can enjoy whatever it is that you're enjoying. So it's the time needed to actually use those goods and services. And then there's cultural time, the time devoted to the cultivation of mind and spirit and to governance and charity. This is also cultural time. It's not necessarily that you're consuming a good and a service, but you're doing something else, some other kind of activity, which is also cultivating you in some way. You could just be hanging out at the pub or something, for all that matters, but you're enjoying social company, you're going to a dinner party, right? All of that is also part of leisure. And there's free time. Free time is when you just want to be on your own. You're like, I'm not consuming, I'm not going to a party, but I want to sit and watch the sunset. That's also important.
So what about watching Netflix? Like, wouldn't that be part
Well,
of like?
I'm not sure where it would go because you are consuming a good and service with Netflix. So I think it will go into category one. Yeah, free time is when you're just vegging and not really doing anything. I don't know if you guys do that. Because it's a great thing to do. Really, it's been destroyed almost. Yeah, but you're still consuming something. Free time would be when you go for a walk or something. You sit in the park. Sure, painting could be, listening to music could be some of those things. Although in each of those you're kind of also consuming stuff. But anyway, you get the picture. Free time is time where you are not constrained by society to do whatever it is that they want you to do.
Explain cultural time?
Cultural time is, when you're going to a dinner party, you're cultivating the mind and spirit, you're doing some charity work, you're doing something else like that. That kind of activity should also is sort of also part of leisure activity because it's not work as such, right? But it's not that you're consuming a product or a service, you're not taking a good or service. Yeah. But you're going to a party, where would a dinner party, a social party, that's leisure time. So that would go into category 2, cultural time. Okay? So how is it? Now this is the question that I was raising before the break. How is it that workers appear to prefer? How is it that you people prefer more money and hence more labor to more free time and more consumption time to more cultural time? How did this come about that they got you to work so hard? Because it's very easy for you, in fact, to work a certain amount, take that and just enjoy it. But they get you to destroy all the other times, the free time and the cultural time, and to give it your all to get as much money, and with that money to get as much stuff as you can. How do they make that happen? Because that process itself is the conversion, the transition of people into the market. If it's not market-based activity, then it's not really fun. That's kind of like what we learn. So the Frankfurt School says the meaningless work of industrial capitalism led to alienation. You might be shocked to discover that most work is quite meaningless, but that's the case. A condition that rendered the masses incapable of distinguishing use value, that's utility, from exchange value, objective needs from subjective wants. So that's why the kind of way in which we do our work, most of it is, he says, kind of useless work, conditions us into thinking that this is very important work because with this work then we're able to get that money, and with that money we'll be able to buy that thing, etc. We don't even realize that we're constantly chasing after these exchange values, even when we're constantly chasing after these commodities, even when they don't necessarily make us happier. We think they make us happier, but we can be fooled into thinking that we are happier than before. Weber calls this heartless hedonism. Marcuse calls it the development of the one-dimensional man. John Kenneth Galbraith calls it the result of advertising, as you said. Advertising constantly makes you think that if you consume more, you will be more popular, you will be more loved, you will be more sexy or something else like that. Social media is actually about, number one, advertising, and number two, about data mining. That data is so precious, it is in its aggregate. It is so precious that the buying and selling of that data is more precious than any revenue that they make from any other source. So they would rather get you on that thing and use Facebook so that they can learn your preferences, or use Twitter so that they can learn your preferences, and then they can use that data, sell it to companies that want that data because they want to be able to target you with the products that they want to target you with.
But the question is that, in a sense, our own cultural time, right?
Yes.
You idealize the way you hang out with people to reflect a certain life that you see around you or you think exists around you. It makes it ephemeral in a sense, right? So isn't free time or cultural time now also becoming a commodity?
Yes. Yes, absolutely right. But when it does become a commodity, then we're not going to call it cultural time according to this definition. It's actually been destroyed as cultural time. It's become a commodity. It's become commoditized. Right? So, I mean, I often like to say that, so many people love to go to psychiatrists. And I'm not against psychiatrists, please, okay? But I always say psychiatrists in the West is like rent a friend, okay? You want somebody to talk to who has a sympathetic ear, and there's nobody to talk to because everybody's so busy with their routine and work, etc., that you have to actually pay somebody to listen to you and be sympathetic. And that is half the cure, trust me. But we all need to vent. If we have good friends, we can vent with them and they're like, yeah, man, I feel you, man. That's horrible, dude. Badi jati hui hai yaar. We really need that affirmation. And when somebody says to you, badi haan yaar, badi jati hui hai, don't you automatically feel 10 times better? You're like, my emotions have been validated, acknowledged and validated. You feel 100 times better. You're like, that's all you want because you know the situation can't change. But you want somebody to say, yeah, man, I hear you, man. Badi jati, right? And that's half of what psychologists do, and that's why they make you feel better because you can get it off your chest. They don't actually give you any solution. They keep asking you questions. Well, then what do you feel about this? But damn it, if I knew what I felt about it, why are we sitting here?
The interesting part is like, what do you want to do about it?
What do you want to do about it?
They're gonna like.
I came to you to tell me. But they're like, no, we don't do that. So, but anyway, I'm not putting psychologists down, even though I just did. But a lot of it is just that, rent a friend. That kind of lifestyle can be so isolating and alienating. Did you ever wonder why rural people don't do that? Somebody in the Midwest is not doing that, but it's a very much a phenomena of big city life and so on, and that sense of isolation that you get into even though you're surrounded by millions of people, and yet you feel more lonely than before. And then you have a small town somewhere, people don't feel lonely. Weird, isn't it? It's about how people are connecting. Okay, so the author now also wants us to distinguish between old luxury and new luxury. Old luxury was associated with the 7 deadly sins, not sins. Sorry about that. Sins. The Christian sins, gluttony, and all of that stuff. Luxury was considered to be in the old world the enemy. Luxury is the enemy of virtue. It was that kind of luxury was considered to be unlimited. It was based on plunder and oppression, and is the neglect of production. And it led to this drunkenness and multitude of useless servants were the luxury of former times, etc. So you can imagine, like, what's that guy's name? Dev Das, right? Dev Das is an army of servants, and he's really, really, just worried about the fact that this woman doesn't love him, and he's drinking, and he has people serving him, and he just drinks his fortune until he dies, right? That's the kind of slothfulness that was old luxury, okay? But new luxury is something different. It is based and leads to rising productivity. It is based on rising productivity. It leads to rising productivity. And it can claim to establish the very foundation of virtue in society. So today, we say that to aspire for luxury is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing. We've changed the terms of the trade. I can give you lots of examples. When I read medieval literature, why did the Mughal Empire fall? Why did the Abbasid Empire collapse? Why did the Umayyad dynasty collapse? Each of those analyses that I read from medieval times, they always pretty much say the same thing. The ruling class became decadent. It was involved in luxury, and they used to drink a lot, and they used to listen to a lot of music, and they used to, enjoy themselves in other ways, etc. But they just lost that hardness to be able to fight. They became effeminate, we are told, right? They became wishy-washy. They became flabby. They became fat. They became cowards. They became, unmanly, quote unquote, right? So all the literature is full of this. The Mughal Empire, why did it collapse? If you listen to any of the YouTube preachers, they will tell you the same thing. It collapsed because the Mughals loved to drink wine, listen to music, and make merry, etc. So maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. I'm not saying that's not entirely true, because the Mughals really did love to party. And that did have an impact on the empire, making it decadent and so on and so forth. But that's not my point. The point is that the new luxury is different from this old luxury. Today, somehow or the other, we are being told that you should buy the latest TV set. No, Mughal had this TV set. You should buy the latest watch and the computer and the phone, etc., etc. And yet, you're still productive, engaged, producing, actively involved in the economy, working hard, etc. So you have luxury, but you're still working so hard. You're producing more and more. The old luxury, where you did luxury, you stopped working. In the new luxury, what was the old luxury based on? Plundering other people, etc., getting their wealth and then enjoying it. But it wasn't based on the development of production. Today's luxury is based on the development of the productive forces. Produce more, then enjoy it. So in America, there's enormous luxury today. But it's not the old kind of luxury where there's a decadent ruling class. I mean, of course, the American ruling class is just as decadent, but they are also producing like crazy. The economy is not slowing down, right? It's the fastest, it's the largest economy in the world. So this is a new kind of luxury. It kind of almost violates everything we've learned from the medieval period. In the medieval period, we learned that the great rulers were the ones, and the good people and the virtuous people were the ones who forewent luxury. You said, who were tough and rough, who went into the desert sword in hand and fought and did all sorts of brave things, etc. But weren't sitting around sipping wine and listening to Tansen, etc. That's right. Akbar was a great, he listened to Tansen. Not a good example. You get the picture. Today, somehow or the other, luxury and the productivity and output of a civilization seems to go together rather than to be a contradiction to each other. Yes. The old luxury was unproductive. You consumed something, it's finished. The new luxury is all related to a cycle of production and consumption that keeps the economy accumulating and growing at a faster pace. Capital.
New luxury, all of us also, or at least I do, all aspire to have that, you want to be that 1% where you don't have to work. You can have all the luxury in the world, you just don't have to work for it. That's what I aspire to. But then but it is true, it's not that different from old luxury. You're not working, but you have all the money in the world, right?
But your capital, the money that you have, is still being productively used. You may not be working, but all the top 1% of the ruling class in the world today, their wealth is being used in some productive way, is going through investment banks, big investment banks, into various investments in the market where it is churning out production, profits flow back, dividends flow back, and you lead a great life. Of course, you get lots of very smart people to take those investment decisions for you, so you don't have to do that much work. But the wealth that you have is productively used. There's a percentage of it which is just sitting around doing nothing. But for any good capitalist, Warren Buffett or
Jeff
Bezos or
Elon
Musk or whatever, they pride themselves on the fact that they are producing something and that that their wealth is being productively used. So that luxury is different from this. That's the way in which the new luxury is different from the old luxury. So now we get into this thing about emulation and innovation. This is a question that was raised earlier. The author says the combination of inequality and social mobility introduced by capitalist society provokes groups excluded from the elite to aspire to appropriate a part of their status by emulating elite material culture. So poor people want to be like rich people. They want to wear the same things that rich people wear. They want to drive the same cars that rich people drive. They want to wear the same watches that rich people wear. They want to listen to the same, sometimes, music that rich people. They want to emulate the rich people in every way. Like Pakistanis, we always want to emulate in terms of fashion. We want to emulate the Europeans or the Americans because they're richer than us. They're more advanced than us. The Italian fashion and French flana and so on. This emulation forces the elites to continuous innovation in order to rejuvenate the capacity of their material goods to serve as public symbols of status and to maintain social distinction. So when the public starts to do the things that the elite is doing, what does the elite do? It says, this is so yesterday. This is so plebeian now. This is so out of fashion. And they have to innovate and create a new style to distinguish the elite from the common folk. How interesting. So the elite is always trying to stay one step ahead of the common folk. The common folk are always trying to catch up with the elite in terms of tastes and styles and so on. And why does the elite always want not to do the same things as the public? Because they're the elite. If they do the same thing as the public, they wear the same kind of clothes as the public, then they wouldn't be able to distinguish themselves from the public. And if you are the elite, then you want to tell people that you're the elite. What's the point of being an elite if you're not even going to be able to show it? If you have it, flaunt it, as they say, right? So this is how in fashion and in tastes and in aesthetics, things continue to develop. Thus, does fashion become an integral part of modern society? Once set in motion, the windmill of fashion rolls as if it were self-activating. You can't emulate the elite so easily. To emulate the elite, you need money. So you have to earn that money to emulate the elite so that you also look like you're well off. But as soon as you do that, as soon as a whole bunch of people do that, what does the elite do? It changes the style. Haircuts could be a great example, right? You always have to change haircut styles because, working class people copy the same styles and then it's just not elite enough anymore, right? Fashion prides itself. I'm not criticizing anybody here, but look at French and Italian fashion. It always prides itself on being elitist, not being common like the masses. To say, oh, this is very common, is like an abuse in the fashion world, right? It has to distinguish itself. They're always striving to distinguish themselves from whatever exists in society. Yeah, I guess, yeah. Sometimes you take things that are normally done, but when people who don't normally do those things do the things that aren't normally done by those people, but are normally done by other people, those normal things become extraordinary. Pehle, Apple came up with a style where the side was beveled, and then they went for the gold side. Then they went back for the beveled side. Classic look. And like, dude, we already had this. But now, because that new one has become popular, then the one that came before that has become an elite symbol again. Same thing happened with Hollywood movies. Like movies that became like run-of-the-mill every day, nobody was even watching them, etc. Unko jab restart kiya in the new version, they became the cool stuff. Fashion that's gone out of fashion and gone out of fashion amongst the poor comes back amongst the rich, mainly because it distinguishes the rich from the poor, not because it's actually a new fashion. So many people go back to classic hairstyles and classic suits. They go back to the classic cut. Then they vary the cut, then they go back to the same cut, because as soon as everybody starts wearing that cut, you have to change it, even if you're going back to one that was there before. So that's how it works. Steve Jobs made that polo neck sweater so popular, and jeans and polo neck sweater extremely popular, even though he was CEO of one of the biggest companies, but he wasn't dressed like a CEO. Suddenly all the CEOs wanted to dress like him now, because all the staff is dressing like the CEOs. So when he comes in a jeans and a polo neck, he stands out. The point of fashion is always to stand out. You know this. I'm sure all of you know this. The point of fashion is always to stand out. That's what the elite wants to do. Okay, so next up. Elite women. Oh, this is interesting. Don't get triggered because there's some triggering stuff here, but it's also interesting. The role of women in elite environments as the active agents of luxury consumptions is central here. Elite stratum becomes creative consumers. They lead a civilizing offensive. How so? Now, Bernard Mandeville says this. I'm not saying it, so don't get angry with me. Even the author is not saying it, okay? Don't get angry with him. All the worldly interests of the nation hinged on the deceit and vile stratagems of women. The number of hands employed to gratify the fickleness and luxury women is nothing short of prodigious. Yani itni mehnat karni padti to make these women happy. Moreover, women could never have come at their capacity to purchase luxury goods by any other means than pinching their families, marketing and other ways of cheating, and pilfering from their husbands. Terrible. But Is there some truth to this? Oh, hang on, before you answer it, because I know you're going to say, no, there's no truth to it.
No, sir.
The point, wait. The point that the author is trying to make is that many of these trends, in fact, began because of the competition amongst men for favors of women who were desirable, satisfying their, quote, frivolous and refined taste in Montesquieu's views, incited a general passion to work, invention, and industry. What he's saying is, what he's saying is that the development of taste and aesthetics, in that development of taste and aesthetics, the courtship game or the performative role of courtship plays a central role in the development and refinement of that taste. So, for example, in the medieval period, if there was the daughter of the Lord of Lums, I don't know, wherever, Lord of Sussex or something, and there were these 5 men who said, okay, if we marry the Lord's daughter, then we inherit that big fortune, which is a huge estate, because those lords were like little kings, and those the elite women were like little princesses or queens, etc., in the literal sense of the word. So haven't you all read like Sense and Sensibility and all those Victorian era romance novels? I mean, this is really what's going on. Then the men are coming, Mr. Darcy and Mr. Falana, and they're trying to show the women that life with me will be beautiful and pleasurable, and I have, we have these riches, and we have this, and we have these horses, and we have this fine cloth, and we have this estate, and look at the manicured gardens we have, and we have this, and we have that, etc., etc. So that's the point. Of course, there's also competition. Of course, there's also competition between women for desirable men, which is the reverse of the whole thing. Cinderella and so on. I don't know. There's lots of novels on that as well. But the point that the author is trying to make is that competition for a desirable mate also led to the development of this of luxury by men, because men had the money, women didn't, but women had to be won over. So the men would do all these things to win the women over, send beautiful dresses and buy the pony that you want and all of the other things, etc. I don't know what they were because I never did them. but you get the picture. That's the point that he's trying to make. And it is there in literature. You can read it. So that's one thing, not the only thing. One second. Just to save the author from being destroyed by all of you. He says that's one thing. The other thing is big cities and courts, luxuries proportionate to the size of towns and above all of the capital. So in the towns, if their number is so great that most are unknown to one another, the desire to distinguish oneself redoubles because there is more expectation of succeeding. So where people come together, they're competing with each other, they're looking at each other, and because of that, it's almost like social media today. वो उसने क्या पहना हुआ है, उसने क्या, वो क्या कर रहा है, वो क्या कर रहा है, वगैरह वगैरह. So where they come together in these big towns, the sort of competition between social layers begins. Societies with an influential court life that were also in the process of becoming more heavily urbanized offered powerful incentives to engage in demonstrative consumption driven by emulation in order to signal information, sometimes false information, designed to secure those private goods. So you were signaling to society. What were you signaling? I'm a rich guy. Come marry me. I'm a rich guy. Come do business with me. I'm a rich guy. Come have dealings with me. Now, horrible as that is, he's not defending it, but he's saying that's the kind of dynamic that led to the refinement of this kind of taste, or the development of this kind of fashionable taste in the elite at that point in time. It's not a justification, okay? It's not saying that's true. Finally, the drive to emulation, he says the social competition bred by its closely packed layers in Britain led to emulation. The large size and character of its capital city, which projected desirable lifestyles for the entire country, led to emulation. And thirdly, domestic servant class. It was a vast army of men and women who were working for the elite, and they would watch the elite and the lifestyle that they would have, and how they would behave. किस कांटे से खाना है, कौन सा ग्लास करना है, ग्लास कैसे पकड़ना है. and they would emulate that. Those acted as very important channels of communication for transmitting the latest styles and spreading a desire for new commodities from their employers to their own social milieu. Have you guys watched Downton Abbey by any chance?
Yes, I was
You can see all of this in Downton Abbey. In that, this is Downton Abbey, of course, is a later period. It's 19th and early 20th century, but it very much captures this: the competition between men for the eldest woman's hand. I've forgotten who it was. I mean, I've forgotten the character's name, etc. The layers coming together, competing with each other, emulating each other. The way in which the elite practices then go from the working people who are working for them, they spread into, are emulated by working people. That describes the dynamic of that particular society. We come to the idea of self-love. Self-love, which was always considered in the past to be something that was to be abjured, has now become a virtue. Self-love was no longer despised as a pre-social passion for natural man that needed to be suppressed by moral instruction. Haven't you ever heard this expression, forgive yourself, love yourself? I mean, it's in so many songs, it's in so many movies. It's the message that you get over and over again in Hollywood. But if you go into the past, and you go into past literature, they don't talk about self-love. The hero isn't somebody who loves themselves or himself or herself. The hero is often somebody who sacrifices himself for something else. The heroic literature of the past, like the Greek literature, all called the heroic literature, is based on that, right? And sometimes you have the tragic hero and so on and so forth. But self-love, the hero, if a hero loved himself, you would consider that that's not heroic at all. Correct? So now the whole aesthetic has changed. The whole sensibility has changed. It could now be seen for the first time in an historical and social context as incorporating a useful, constructive passion, which emerged at a certain stage in the development of society. वो मुझे याद आया वो एक फैशन ब्रांड है बालों का जिसकी टैग लाइन है because you're worth it या because you deserve it or something. L'Oreal, right? उसका यही है ना, you deserve it. So what is that? Self-love. Garnier, I don't know, whatever it is. I never pay attention. But you get the picture. Self-love suddenly becomes acceptable. Montesquieu defended the pursuit of wealth by insisting that it led not to la dolce vita, the corrupting, unstable indulgence of vice, but to dox commerce, which is a powerful civilizing agent that polished and softened manners because of the heightened importance of reputation in a commercial society. Everybody cares about your reputation, so that's why you sort of take care of yourself. दांत साफ करके आ, कंघी करके आ, अच्छे कपड़े पा के आ, लीड़े चंगे पा के आ, की कीता है, ठीक है ना? Self-love suddenly becomes the new mantra that dominates society. These accumulating experiences, the exposure to urban life, and access to imported goods, cause men within them the desire to call attention to themselves by small things, cause his desire to be enlarged, Bourbon, arouse in them a desire for a more splendid way of life, Hume. Did men content themselves with bare necessities? We should have a poor world. So in this way, the aesthetic sense continues to develop. What were the things? The competition for mates. There's a lot of theories, by the way, that music was invented to compete for mates. The emulation of the elite, the signaling and performance of social status. Again, please understand that I'm not justifying these things. I'm not saying these are good things, but I'm explaining in history how these kind of contradictions led to the development of this kind of aesthetic sense. Okay, finally, to conclude now, humanity has become, in former times, men were forced to labor because they were slaves to others. And in today's world, we are forced to labor because we have become slaves to our own wants.
Sir, where did you click this picture?
Oh yes.
Yes, sir. It's literally like Tim Hortons in Lahore and everybody's gone nuts.
Hannah? Is it in Lahore?
Starbucks.
I thought it was in Karachi. Anyway, tells you how informed I am.
Sir, it's in Facebook.
Yeah, is it? Achha. There was a picture of this line, and then there was a picture of a food line right next to it, which I shared on Twitter. I don't know how many of you saw it. And just thought it was like very kind of contrasts what was going on in the elite versus what was going on, amongst the working class. Gee. All right, to conclude now. So what have we learned? In the long 18th century, both consumer demand and the supply of market-oriented labor grew by means of reallocation of the productive resources of households. Okay? This reallocation of resources stands at the heart of the division of labor that Adam Smith held to be the driving force in economic improvement. In this era, the division of labor cannot be understood simply or even primarily as a matter of organization of work at the firm, जिस तरह Adam Smith pin factory की बात करता है, or as a macroeconomic phenomena that increased the range of intermediate outputs. Rather, and here is the main thesis, it was achieved primarily at the level of the household, where it can be identified as a simultaneous rise in the percentage of household production sold to others and a rise in the percentage of household consumption purchased from others. So households in the long 18th century are reorienting themselves to the market. They are going from producing for themselves, spending a lot of time in leisure, not producing for the market now, not really caring about consumption, to producing for the market, getting rid of leisure time, etc. And leisure itself changes from that free leisure to the paid leisure, to make more money, to consume more. There's a whole trend from subsistence, meeting your needs, to consumption, which I captured in the previous picture. That's why I put that picture in. That's what's good, good and fun. But this changeover from one side to the other is a decision taken by households. That's the important thing that the author wants us to recognize. Okay? I want to again emphasize, not just with respect to the statements made about women and competition between men for women and its role in the development of the aesthetic sense, but with respect to the entire thesis, that I'm not necessarily in agreement with this thesis, but I am trying to show you all the different kinds of theories that are there in the academia regarding the Industrial Revolution of Britain. I've shown you, for example, sort of an analysis by looking at the machines and how they contributed to the development, the Atlantic slave trade, the colonial trade, the development of the market system. And now, what are we looking at in the last example is the changeover in the household, especially in relation to the European marriage pattern. So these are the various and different explanations behind how and why the Industrial Revolution in Britain came about.